Hello, hello, hello. Hello, everyone. I'm sure you're all absolutely knackered and exhausted from all that flag waving. I'm sure you've all overdone it, as I have for the Jubilee. I was actually out celebrating with a lot of queens. I was at a gay festival. I got in at 6 this morning, so I'm a bit fragile, but I think we're going to persevere. Obviously, it is the Platinum Jubilee of the Queen. The Queen Elizabeth II, if you didn't know, is our head of state. And I think some people might think, you grumpy little lot. Everyone's having a good time, having a little party, having the little street parties, just, getting into a big national festival. And here you come, stamping on their sandcastles with your miserable Republican, anti-party, anti-Britain lefties. Yeah, I get all that. But if not now, when? When is there ever a right time to talk about whether we should have an elected head of state in this country? We talked about this on the Jeremy Vine show the other week. Should Republicans be quiet for a change during the Jubilee? And I was like, what? Oh yeah, you can't even open a newspaper these days without having Republicans going on about elected head of state. It's not really a discussion this country has. We don't talk about an elected head of state, partly, of course, because almost all our media supports the monarchy, not just newspapers. The BBC doesn't even bother to pretend it's being impartial when it's covering issues to do with the royal family. It's not even a pretense, is there? But also, maybe some self-criticism. People like myself don't talk about this very much either. Why? I suppose the issue is we kind of think, well, there's so many bread and butter issues: housing crisis, poverty, cost of living crisis, the climate, existential crisis facing humanity. We could go on. That it's about picking battles, because if I looked at the polling, the vast majority support increasing taxes on the rich or public ownership. The monarchy, though we'll talk about the polling, support for the monarchy in some form is still a majority. Those of us who support elected head of state remain in a minority, though that does seem to be changing, which we will talk about. Now, we got two brilliant guests today. Later on, we're going to be talking about the Amber Heard Johnny Depp libel trial, and I think some very disturbing implications of it, and particularly what it means, whatever you think about the verdict, not least the coverage of the trial and the way it's been discussed, what that means with women who are survivors of male violence. The fact that, Me Too was about, trying to address an imbalance in which women systematically face harassment, abuse, and violence at the hands of men, but are rarely believed, and the vast majority of men get away with it. And now, is this part of a broader backlash against that Me Too movement, if you like? And what does that mean? So we'll talk about it. We've got a really brilliant guest who we've had on before, Lucia Osborne-Crowley, who's done an incredible job just going through, covering the trial and everything that's happened in it. So we're very fortunate to speak to her and what this all means. Now, the Jubilee. We've all had our favourite moments. I think, for me, for those who are listening to the podcast, what you're about to hear is the reception that Boris Johnson and Carrie Johnson, the Prime Minister's partner, received when they arrived.
But the Queen welcomes them as someone they're part of her family.
The Prime Minister just arriving with his wife.
It's quite booing in the crowd there.
Well, and you can hear it. There is really quite a lot of booing, actually.
Wow.
A substantial amount.
Didn't see that coming. That's quite a moment.
It's funny. It's just look, come on. In these dark times, we need all the amusement we can get, and that is amusing. I think it's notable that I think what's so worrying for the Prime Minister there is I don't think there's that many cards carrying radical lefties in the Jubilee crowds. Like if you're a really committed lefty, it's not normally the sort of event you turn up. Those are monarchists. Those are people who really believe in the royal family. They're the sorts of people who, frankly, should be the rank and file of the Conservative Party. They're booing a Conservative Prime Minister. It doesn't look good for him, does it? I mean, I'm going to put my Defend Keir Starmer hat on. Not something I normally do. But Dan Hodges from the Mail on Sunday said, to be fair, also worth noting that Keir arriving to apathetic silence isn't exactly a vote of confidence. Yeah, but it's the crowd, isn't it? It's a monarchist crowd. I mean, those are kind of I would imagine a large proportion of them, to say the least, have been consistent Conservative voters for large parts of their life. So you wouldn't really expect any Labour leader to get a big kind of rapturous reception. But Boris Johnson got, I think, the reception he deserved. Now, something else before I bring in our brilliant guest to talk about this. The Mail on Sunday, here we go. This is them. It's a spot for those listening on the podcast. Marmalade, Your Majesty. It's Paddington Bear, of course, with the Queen. It's this clip that's been done. It was kind of seen as, do you remember during the 22 Olympic ceremony when James Bond, the scene with James Bond and the Queen with the helicopter and all the rest of it. And everyone's like, oh, this is so cute. It's so sweet. And again, people are like, are you going to jump in the sandcastle again, you miserable lefty? But Paddington Bear would have been treated as an illegal immigrant and would be deported to Rwanda under legislation. I know it's a constitutional role, but signed into law by the Queen. So it's nice to have this little cutesy moment, but I think it's worth underlining that the actual Paddington Bear would be deported to Rwanda under the government's current legislation. Now, let's bring in, as our first guest, Graham Smith, who is the CEO of Republic, which is I think you can guess what that does. It campaigns for an elected head of state, a republic, if you like. Graham, how you doing?
Hi, Owen. How are you doing?
Fine. Right, Graham. So a lot of people go, look, choose your timing, guys. Everyone's having a good time. Why can't we just enjoy whatever we think about the monarchy, the parties, the celebrations? We've had a tough few years. The people coming together is great. It's wonderful. Why talk about a republic now?
Well, why not now? And absolutely now. This is not a national celebration. Vast majority of people are not celebrating it. Most people are just enjoying their weekend, whether going away or just staying at home for 4 days. The polling is quite consistent on this. We did a poll that showed 11% were very interested. 54% not interested. There's another poll saying that 14% had planned to do anything this weekend. A poll that we did, which I think you alluded to before, about the support for the monarchy, showing that support had dropped sharply from 75% about 5 years ago to 60% now, also showed a jump up to 27% for people wanting to abolish the monarchy, which means there are almost twice as many people wanting to abolish it as planned to celebrate it. Now, obviously, it's still a majority for keeping it, but the idea that this is a national celebration just isn't true. And there've been quite a few photos going around on Twitter showing royal or jubilee events where no one's turned up, or hardly anybody has turned up. So we're getting a very false picture from the media about what's going on, and also no one's stopping them either. They're still enjoying it. So the idea that we're sort of interrupting their party and stopping them from doing that is not true at all. But this is a promotion of monarchy, and it's a political question. So of course it has to be challenged. Going back, so you go back 20 years to the 2002 Jubilee, and then go back further to other big royal events. Republicans tended to duck and cover and sort of make silly remarks about, oh well, I'm going to go and spend a weekend in France or Ireland or whatever. Republic over the last 10-12 years has said, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to step up and challenge what's being said and use the opportunity to create debate. So absolutely the right time, doesn't spoil anyone's fun, and people can hear the alternative arguments.
Well, I had a great weekend myself, to be honest with you, but wasn't. I was celebrating, as I said, with Queens rather than the Queen. Let's look at the deep dive of the polling then. Let's have a little look. So I'd flashed this up. We flashed this up just while you were speaking there. More than 1 in 4 want the monarchy abolished, with support at just 60%. More than 1 in 4, 27% of Brits now support abolishing the monarchy. Support for retaining the monarchy stands at just 60%, well below the 70-75% previously reported from across the polling industry over the last 10 years. And it's notable, actually, amongst younger people, that support for the monarchy is the lowest, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And there's been other polling since the beginning of last year, which shows that even one of them was under 35, so not under 25, but under 35. So majority now, or more people wanting abolition than wanting to keep it. And the same is true in Scotland. So the support for keeping the monarchy in Scotland is now down to around 45%. So, there is quite a lot of shifting in polling. And the big factor, as people keep on saying, oh, the Queen's so popular. Well, yes, she is. Well, I don't know about popular is the right word. She's widely admired. People like her and don't have a bad thing to say about her. But that's not the true of Charles. And the Queen's not going to be around for very much longer. Charles is
You're
not
getting
the
us into the
person.
Tower of London with that kind of talk. You can't just throw
Charles
in
is
the
not
Queen
going
dying just casually like that.
Well, it's going to happen. But I mean, Charles is definitely not the person to turn that around. If the Queen can't keep those polling numbers up, there's no way that Charles is going to. So I suspect that when Charles is on the throne, that we're going to see another drop. And quite possibly, if it's already down to 60, quite possibly down below 50 nationwide.
I think it's also true, isn't it, that a lot of it's quite soft support. So you've got, according to the poll, we're in about a 25% who actively support an elected head of state in republics. There's a quarter, and as we've noted, amongst younger generations, actually, that's much higher. But I suppose you've got lots of other people. You've got another, I would say, you've got like a quarter of the population are probably like, we love the monarchy. The monarchy is really great. Everything about the monarchy is great. But a lot of other people are in the kind of, kind of often you'll get things like, well, do we want President Blair? Let's go through some of those arguments. President Blair, you might like Blair. So a majority of people.
Well, I can tell you that I've been doing this a long time, and I have met one person who worked for the Labour Party who liked the idea of President Blair. Just one. Everybody else says, well, we don't want President Blair. So how the hell is he going to win an election with no one wants him? So, but it's a daft comment, simply because the sort of the logic of it is that we can't possibly get someone better than Prince Charles out of 65 million people. Now, I think that we probably can. And if you look at Ireland, where they have elected heads of state who are doing a similar job, a very limited role, they have brilliant heads of state. Michael D. Higgins has polling ratings as high, if not higher, than the Queen. Iceland also has brilliant heads of state. They were the first country to elect a woman as president, as head of state in 1980, Vigdis Finnbogadóttir, and she stayed in office for 16 years. There's brilliant heads of states in places like Finland and Germany and whatever. So, yeah, it just doesn't stack up as an argument. It's a daft argument. And it's a way of trivializing it and dismissing it by just saying president, someone controversial. It's also slightly insulting to the British people, because ultimately it's also saying, well, we can't trust the British people to do the job. It's like, well, on the one hand, you can trust them, and on the other hand, it's nothing to do with whether or not you trust them. They've got a right to choose their head of state, whoever it is. And if they get it wrong, they can change their mind later.
I mean, do you think one of the problems, I think, is because there's trust in politicians in this country has really collapsed. I mean, there was polling recently, if I could just bring it up quickly, there was polling which just shows, because I know people think it's kind of culturally ingrained that people in this country just, forever have never liked politicians. But so a recent study found 63% thought politicians were out for themselves, compared to 48% in 2014 and 35% in 1944. Yeah. I mean, one of the problems we face as Republicans, don't we, is there's such cynicism about politicians because of numerous scandals and the way politicians generally have behaved, that it's easy for monarchists to go, oh, that's the one thing we really need in this country, more politicians. I mean, obviously, all a politician is someone who's elected by the people. There's nothing innate about what a politician is. It's just.
I mean, it's not even someone elected. I mean, I would say that Charles is a politician. It's just being born into the job. And the two things to say about that: if you want a better politics, you need a better constitution. And getting rid of the monarchy is about having a better constitution. It's about also writing it down, limiting the power of government and parliament, and having a head of state who can be a kind of referee in the system and step in. I mean, for example, you might have a rule that says if a prime minister has broken the law, that they should resign, and if they don't, then perhaps the head of state could have a word with them and say, well, maybe you should. The Queen doesn't do anything other than what she's told to do by the prime minister. So the failure of our politicians is as much a failure of the system. So change the system, and you should be able to get better politicians. I mean, there are people we've elected, but we've done it under a pretty awful system, both in terms of specifically in terms of the power that they have once they're in office. I mean, the Crown centralizes so much power in the hands of Downing Street. And this is why, I mean, it was a Tory Lord Hailsham, 40 odd years ago, that coined the phrase elective dictatorship. because the crown focuses so much power in the hands of down the street. The other thing is, if you're saying that, oh, they're in it for themselves, well, what do you think the royals are in it for? If they say that if corruption, the definition of corruption is the abuse of public office for private gain. That is also the definition of royalty. I mean, it is a nepotistic institution in which they do everything they can to take all of our money, or lots of our money, and spend it on themselves. And if we look at, I mean, you remember the MP's expenses crisis from 2009 when that story broke, and people were getting upset about an MP spending public money on a packet of biscuits. Prince Charles spends way more than that. We essentially give him an income of £20 million a year out off the Duchy of Cornwall, which is like 6 times the total combined income of all the elected heads of state of Europe. For what? So it's a bit of a. It's just, the argument sounds good superficially, but it doesn't stack up.
Tourism. People are always going about tourism. I always think this shows a lot. I know you're laughing because you hear this all the time, but I mean, I mean, on one level, I just think it's such an astonishing lack of, I would say, patriotism, a lack of kind of, confidence in your own country, to think the only reason people come to visit here is because of an unelected head of state. And also, in fact, I don't know if this is still the case, because I think you did this study, but a while ago, something like the top 20 tourism attractions in Britain, and only one royal palace or royal property made it into the top 20, and that was Windsor Castle. It's 17, whilst Legoland in Windsor was at number 7. So actually, Legoland is more of a tourism attractor than the monarchy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been retweeting a graphic today about which shows a list. I think it's 100 top attractions, and none of them are particularly popular compared to a whole host of places. I mean, Chester Zoo is more popular than Buckingham Palace, and I think Edinburgh Zoo as well. Certainly, places around right away around the country. The thing about what you just said about being unpatriotic and not having faith in the country is really important, because it's not just about the tourism thing, but it's also about the whole notion that people say, "Oh, we'll be so boring without." Then we can't possibly choose our own head of state. Who are we going to have? And we won't get tourists. And they are investing so much in the royal family as somehow making this country everything, when this country is made by millions of excellent people who do extraordinary work at creating the culture and the business and the attractions and all the rest of it. And the idea that this hugely successful economy and this largely prosperous country is reliant on one family living in a dozen big houses is clearly nonsense. On the tourism, though, there isn't a single shred of evidence that if we get rid of the monarchy, we lose any tourism. Not any at all. And
well, no one visits France, Graham. France has no tourists. France has no tourists.
This is it, yeah. But also, I mean, the best figure, or the biggest figure that's ever been put out, was 11 years ago for the wedding. Visit Britain did a couple of press releases, and they said, "Oh, this is going to be great for tourism." And we did a freedom of information request on their press release, and their own research department had emailed their press office saying, "You can't say that is not true. We don't have any data to support that." And then they put out a figure saying that the monarchy brings in £500 million a year in tourism revenue. And we looked at what they'd done, and they'd added up all of the ticket revenue for all of the attractions around the country. They even had the slightest connection, historical or present, with the royal family, including places like St. Paul's Cathedral, for example, which is an enormous tourist attraction in its own right. And so we debunked that, and they stopped using it. But even the 500 million, which is the highest figure they've ever given, is less than 0.5% of our entire tourism industry revenue. So it's just complete nonsense.
Tad Canwell says, thanks to Jubilee, Paul Heaton of the Housemartins did a really good concert in Dublin yesterday to avoid the whole thing. So thanks, Lizzie. Oh, Paul Heaton, big fan. David Boata asked, do you think the abolition of the monarchy could lead to a codified constitution?
Yes. I mean, it doesn't have to, but it should, and it could. And I think the simplest thing to do, what we argue for, is essentially what we have, but democratic, so parliamentary democracy. And a codified constitution doesn't have to be overly complicated, where every point and nut and bolt in the system is written down. It can simply set out the main institutions of the state and how they relate to each other, and what powers they are, or what limits they are. And if you look at the Irish constitution, it's pretty straightforward. It's one of the more modern ones, excepting from the Eastern Europe and so on, which have only written them in the last 30 years. But the Irish constitution is obviously only about 70 years old. And it's really just says, look, you've got a parliament. This is how they're elected or appointed. You've got a head of state who's elected, and they've all got these powers. It doesn't go a huge way from that. So it's relatively straightforward. And I think having that written constitution also means that it's very clear. People can go and buy a copy, read it, see exactly where power lies. And then if we want to change the constitution, it's very clear which line you change, what you can change it to, etc., etc. So I think the written constitution is part of the Republican proposal, including also obviously getting rid of the House of Lords and having an elected upper house.
I mean, you mentioned obviously the Queen is, I think it's fair to say, she's a popular figure. There's not really any dislike for Queen Elizabeth II, I don't think, in any meaningful way in the country. I think people really know her. I mean, that's part of it. There's a certain mystique in the sense she's not seen to have, I mean, there are question marks, actually. Obviously, the monarchy have intervened in democratic politics, but she's seen widely to kind of be above politics, not really interfering. But the point about Prince Charles, which you made, is that's not true with him, and that's why he would be so much more divisive.
Yes, I mean he is. I mean, we've done a documentary which is on our YouTube channel a couple of years ago now, which is called "The Man Who Shouldn't Be King," and it goes through some quite extraordinary stories about his interventions in politics, but also his interventions in science. And there's the story of Edzard Ernst, the leading expert on alternative medicines, and because he was a scientist, he was debunking quite a few of these alternative medicines. And Charles was not happy. The bosses at Exeter University were lent on, or at least that's the claim, and Edzard Ernst's department was defunded. We went down to Cornwall and to the Isles of Scilly and talked to people there who are appalled by the way that the duchy operates. And he intervenes in two ways. Firstly, he pushes his own agenda, whether that's pushing alternative medicine, whether that is on planning or education. I mean, it's been said that a while back now, when Alex Salmond was the first minister in Scotland, that his government adopted Prince Charles's educational proposals from one of his educational charities. It's been said that the NHS spent money on homeopathy for a lot longer than it wanted to because of pressure from the royal family. But as well as pushing his own agenda, he also lobbies for his own interests. And it's been said that he was partly behind the switch to the ditching of the civil list and the adoption of the sovereign grant, which is hugely beneficial to them. I mean, David Cameron himself the other day was quoted as saying that, we were probably a bit generous to them when we did that. It's an incredibly generous and ridiculous system. And again, that's because they've been pushing for it. So he is someone that not only does that behind closed doors, but makes his views very, very clear in public. And that's going to be a huge problem in the future, particularly if we know that he has a particular view on something and the government changes its view to align with his. There's obviously going to be questions as to why that was.
Just a couple of final things. Let's hear, I think, one of the most eloquent contributions in support of a republic, Stacey Solomon.
But I just don't get it. I don't get any of it.
What do you mean? You don't get what?
Yeah. I don't get why we're so obsessed with these humans that are exactly the same. Like, it could be us four sitting there. I just don't get it.
But are you talking about what you mean as royals or as, like, Kim Kardashian? Because for me, they're becoming celebrities.
Well, to me, that's all they are.
The Queen
is their celebrities.
For me, is brilliant.
I love the Queen.
No, duty, responsibility.
She's always worked really hard, hasn't
I
she?
would work hard if the whole country paid for me to have like 12 houses and work really hard.
They don't pay for all of the houses, but
just a few.
I love the way they were actually trying to patronise her there. It was
incredibly patronising. Yeah, I mean, Stacey Solomon is absolutely right on all this, and I think that they are very ordinary people. They're unremarkable people, and they don't show much sign of being particularly engaged with the outside world, being particularly inquisitive or anything like that. They're not particularly well educated. Nothing wrong with that, but I mean, the point is we then put them up on a pedestal and pretend that they are incredible and amazing. And the hardworking thing is complete fiction as well. I mean, we've done the sums on that. I can't remember all the numbers, but I mean, if you add up all the hours that they're supposedly doing, it adds up to about the equivalent of full-time, 2.5 months for the most busy one, maybe 1.5 months, I think it was for Kate Middleton in 2019. So, these are not hardworking people, and their work, as someone said, they don't work, they attend. They turn up at things, smile and wave and go home again. Most of their engagements are at home, so they don't even have to travel anywhere.
But just finally, I mean, I think maybe. Do you think it's true that, because we heard there it's quite refreshing that you don't normally hear in daytime television people, especially celebrities, making the case against the monarchy. I think Stacey Sullivan's brilliant. I think she did that very well, in a very human way as well. But I think, isn't it true the Republican movement just really punches below its weight in this country? I mean, why? What? I mean, obviously, that's your job. You're the head of the main Republican movement in this country, but it doesn't seem to have much cut through. I mean, I know it's a hostile media environment, so it's not exactly easy, but it just, given there's particularly so many young people, the next generation, who have antipathy or simply just not interested at all in the monarchy, why isn't that message being able to be communicated in a far more effective way than it currently is?
I think Republic, I think, punches above its weight because we're not a huge organization. One of the things I would say is that people that do support getting rid of the monarchy need to speak up more. There's only so much that we can do as an organization. We need to get a lot more people speaking up more regularly and more convincingly taking it seriously. I mean, I think there has been in the past a view that this is something which isn't necessarily going to happen, and therefore why expend any energy on it. And you were saying before, there's bread and butter issues, there's a lot of serious issues coming up, but this is a serious issue, and it is also a bread and butter issue. I mean, the reason why governments can act with impunity is because of the crown powers and the power they have over parliament. So getting rid of the monarchy is actually a serious political issue. So, and I think that with the falling of support, with the succession coming, with the collapse of support around the Commonwealth, we're going to see all of the Caribbean countries move away from the monarchy. Australia and Canada are now looking like they're going to move away as well. I think this is the moment where we need to start saying, okay, this is moved from a completely unlikely campaign success to a inevitable campaign success. And I think that as the polling drops further, the inevitability will look even more plausible. And people used to say, if you go back 20 odd years, people would say, well, gay marriage isn't going to happen for 20, 30 years. We're never going to get a black president. It's never going to be a woman in the White House. I mean, all these things have happened, and big change happens quite quickly. And we are now, I think, coming up to the big turning point, which we're already seeing in the polling. And I think that as we get towards the end of the Queen's reign, we're going to see that polling shift even further. And then when we see King Charles on the throne, even further too. So it's, I mean, we're doing quite a lot, and we do get through more than a lot of organizations of our size do, but it does need a lot more other people to amplify that, to project it, and to get involved. And I think that we will see a lot more voices speak up on this issue in the coming months and years.
As the one moment, I think, though, which I think one thing I did enjoy, just a little segue in the Jubilee, was that Boris Johnson, as we saw, got booed to the rafters. But Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, who really the royals have kind of systematically turned on, and so has much of the monarchist press. The fact they were cheered by, again, a crowd which you might think would be the most sympathetic to the kind of anti-Meghan, anti-Harry bashing, I thought it was interesting, whatever you think about, obviously, an elected head of state.
I think that it shows that the press do not represent or reflect the opinion of the public. Most people, I think, are relatively sympathetic, and royalists are relatively sympathetic to them. I don't have huge amounts of time, and certainly Harry still behaves like a he's got this sense of entitlement and so on. I mean, he's royal, that's the way they behave. But I do think it's interesting. And the Meghan thing and the Oprah interview and the accusations of racism are a big factor, in my view, as to why the polling is dropping, along with Andrew, who still stands accused of criminal offences for which he's not investigated. I mean, some of those offences happened here in London, or allegedly happened here in London, I should say. And the Metropolitan Police are not interested. So there are big scandals that have really distanced the royals from a lot of people. And when you think about the zeitgeist, the issues of the the age, if you like, the BLM, Me Too, mental health, awareness of slavery and colonialism. The monarchy is on the wrong side of these and cannot respond to them, and is looking pretty bad in relation to most of them, and they don't know what to do and they can't turn it around. And this is why people who are younger, I think particularly, are losing interest and turning away.
Graham, it's been a big honour. Thank you so much for joining us and eloquently putting forward the case for an elected head of state in this time when obviously we're expected to be even more silent about this than even in normal circumstances. But I do think it's a cause which will come of age. I think we'll see, as you say, other Commonwealth countries are turning away from the monarchy. I think it's probably likely that Australia will be a republic in the not too distant future. But thanks so much for joining us. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you for having me on, and I hope we get to have you more involved in the future.
Definitely. All right. Take care, buddy. Take care yourself.
Okay. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Great stuff. So if you're watching live, do click the like button on Facebook. It's good for the algorithm. Leave comments. I do read through your comments as much as possible. And you can support us by signing up on patreon.com/OwenJones84. That's how we keep the show on the road and do all of this. And the videos we're making, got lots of interviews and so on coming up, as well as documentaries as ever. And you can also support us on Super Chat, as people are doing. And I will read out all your names at the end. Now, Amber Heard and the Johnny Depp trial, the libel trial. Now, what happened here was a few years ago, Amber Heard wrote a piece for the Washington Post in which she wrote, 2 years ago, I became a public figure representing domestic abuse. Now, it didn't actually mention Johnny Depp in the article, but his lawyer said it was about him and was defamatory, and as a consequence sued Amber Heard. Now, it was a jury libel trial, and they found in favour of Johnny Depp. I mean, we're talking $15 million. I mean, there was one ruling in favour of Amber Heard that one of the agents of Johnny Depp had defamed her. Now, let's just have a quick look at a little bit of that verdict.
All right. Mr. Foreperson, is this the verdict of the jury? Yes. All right. Is it unanimous? Yes. Thank you, sir. Jamie?
In civil case number CL 2019-2911, Mr. Depp's claim against Ms. Heard. 1. As to the statement appearing in the online op-ed entitled, Amber Heard, I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. That has to change. In the Washington Post online edition, quote, I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. That has to change, end quote. Do you find that Mr. Depp has proven all the elements of defamation? Answer, yes.
Now, we've got the brilliant writer, Lucia Osborne-Crowley, whose tweets on this I've read all the way through the trial. So it was just, absolutely brilliant reporting of what was actually happening. I didn't watch the trial myself, so it was brilliant to be able to read somebody who watched it and went through all the evidence and is an all-round expert on the issue. So, Lucia, it's great to see you. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you for having me. And I must say, there's absolutely nothing I would rather be doing to avoid celebrating the Queen's Jubilee than talking to you.
Bless
so
you. Right back at you. Great to share a not celebrating the Jubilee together. So, in terms of it, let's just I guess a quick kind of response, because in terms of what I found the coverage of this deeply disturbing, and not least on social media. And what people have said now, what a lot of people have concluded, well, look, the jury was presented with the evidence, they had to sit through it all, and they found in favor of Johnny Depp, therefore he's absolved, and others, obviously the argument then is actually Amber Heard is the abuser. What do you say to all of that? That's the narrative now, which has become so dominant. What do you say to that?
Well, I think this is really concerning because the problem with that narrative that we've seen in the media, and as you say on social media in particular, is that it's lifted directly from the arguments made by Johnny Depp's lawyers. And it doesn't actually comport with the evidence that the jury saw. So Johnny Depp's lawyers strategically went into this case, instead of making an argument that was basically, rather than looking at the evidence of abuse, because in a defamation trial, in order for there to be defamation, the statement that Amber Heard made about being a victim of abuse has to be false. But instead of specifically engaging with that, Johnny Depp's team, right from the get-go, decided to kind of reverse the narrative and say, actually, I'm the victim here. And, you know, Amber Heard was abusive to me. And, you know, that's his lawyer's prerogative. But it was it was repeated in the media without much scrutiny. And I think that's a real problem, because her legal arguments and what she presented at trial certainly wasn't recreated in the media in the same way that his was. And that created a very, very one-sided conversation, which actually distracted, to my mind, from the evidence and from the actual question for the jury, which was there ever a time in which Johnny Depp was abusive towards Amber Heard? That, even if there was strictly legally, even if there was one instance of abuse, physical, psychological, sexual, anywhere on the spectrum of abuse, then legally the jury shouldn't have found in favor of Johnny Depp on all three counts. However, Johnny Depp's lawyers did a really great job of replacing that question with this kind of a separate question about, you know, who is to blame in this relationship, which is, you know, that's not a legal question, and it's certainly not the legal question that we have here. And what we have as a result of that is a jury verdict that, if you watch all the evidence that she presented, is really hard to square with how much evidence she has that she was in fact a victim of abuse.
Can you explain to people how it's possible that Johnny Depp lost his libel case against the Sun newspaper when they called him a wife beater, and we now have another libel case with a completely conflicting outcome?
So this is something I really, really think we need to keep talking about, because in all the coverage I saw of the US trial, there was scant discussion about the UK decision. And again, this is something that Johnny Depp's lawyers wanted from the beginning. They wanted it not to be part of the conversation at all, and largely succeeded. And that's a real problem, because, as you say, we now have two decisions, one from the UK High Court, which has more weight in terms of precedent than the district court in Virginia. And we have two completely conflicting outcomes. Here in the UK, we had a long trial. My colleagues at the Libel news agency that I work for were there every day. Johnny Depp gave evidence, Amber Heard gave evidence. We heard evidence about exactly the same alleged instances of abuse. And in that case, it was a bench trial, which means we have a judge making the decision rather than a jury, which is more common here for libel cases. And that judge resoundingly said that this was not defamation because it was true, because Amber Heard had proven to him that Johnny Depp had abused her 12 times. So he said on 12 instances of physical abuse, those facts had been made out. Now we have a jury decision that goes completely the other way. And firstly, I think the main way to explain that is the judge versus jury question. So here in the US trial, we had a presentation of the evidence that was really geared towards a jury decision, because it was about these kind of competing narratives and this idea that Johnny Depp's lawyers were able to kind of reverse the victim and offender roles, and get the jury to feel a lot of sympathy for him. And if you read the UK judgment, there was a bit of that in the UK, but the judge said, here's some research about domestic violence perpetrators. Here's why I don't, with all the evidence I've seen of Johnny Depp's misogynistic language, his physical abuse, his threats, here's why I don't believe what he's saying about being a victim. And a judge has to have a really kind of structured opinion about those things, whereas juries are very different. They're unpredictable. We have no idea what it was that swayed them on this decision. And so, I think having the bench trial versus the jury trial explains a lot of it. Also, the trial took place in Virginia. Neither Johnny Depp nor Amber Heard live in Virginia or have ever lived in Virginia. The reason it was in Virginia, which Johnny Depp's lawyers have almost admitted to in certain interviews is that they have very different laws about defamation, and it's easier to prove defamation in Virginia. So the thing here is, we're talking about, what we're looking at is kind of a backlash against people speaking up about abuse, a backlash against Me Too, and we're looking at it take place in a legal arena. And there are a few things about this case that make that really worrying, because to run essentially the same trial in two different jurisdictions is not something that is usually allowed. I was really surprised when I read the statement of claim for this case because of how similar it is to the UK trial, and the fact that it was allowed to go forward. That kind of signals to a lot of people around the world that if they have lots of money and a really good legal team, they can kind of keep shopping in different jurisdictions until they get the outcome that they want as well. And it's confusing because we've got two completely conflicting decisions. And I'm sure you've seen this online, people will just completely, I've spoken to so many people who completely disregard the UK decision and have decided that the US decision is the only one that matters, but that's not how court judgment should work. They are both relevant pieces of information about this issue.
Can you explain why, just very clearly, explain to us, for people who are maybe don't know about it or confused, why evidence suggests from Johnny Depp's agents suggesting that he had apologized for physically allegedly abusing Amber Heard, why that wasn't admissible? Why couldn't that be used as evidence? And also why the jury, I've forgotten the legal term, it's where they're contained, so they don't they're not exposed to media coverage. You'll know the term. Because what happened is the jury, obviously, this was an exceptionally high profile trial, and the coverage all over social media was very tilted in one direction. There's no question about that. And did the jury then engage or see any of that? So those two issues: why wasn't that evidence? Why wasn't it admissible? That alleged, what Johnny Depp had allegedly said through agents, and why weren't the jury prevented, as in other trials, from engaging with the media and so on?
So these are two of the most important questions, I think. And to be honest, I think these will be the two questions that end up on appeal. So Amber Heard is appealing this verdict, and these are the legal things that she's challenging. And I think rightly so. I'm very confused by some of the judicial decisions that were made in this case. So to take your first question, in terms of the evidence that the US jury didn't see, of which there was a lot. So in particular, there was contemporaneous medical records of Amber Heard reporting incidences of abuse to her therapist at the time when it happened, dating back to the early 2010s, at the beginning of their relationship. And then in particular, there's a text from Johnny Depp to his personal assistant at the time. The other way around, from his personal assistant to Johnny Depp, saying that he had to tell Johnny Depp that in a kind of drug-induced blackout the night before, he had kicked Amber Heard. And the text says, "He was devastated when I told him that he'd kicked you, and he's very sorry." So this is important because a huge part of this trial, both in Amber Heard's testimony and in the expert testimony that we heard, was about the fact that Johnny Depp's substance abuse issues meant that he had several days at a time when he couldn't necessarily remember what had happened. So one of the things that Amber had said was, I'm not even necessarily saying that he's getting up here and saying this never happened and he's deliberately lying. I'm saying he doesn't remember. And I do. And this text is really important to that argument, right? Because it's a contemporaneous piece of documentary evidence with someone close to Johnny Depp confirming that he didn't remember, and also implicitly confirming that this act of physical violence happened and that Johnny Depp was sorry about it. So the jury didn't see that text. And that's because this judge took a very, very, very strict approach to the rules, the hearsay rules of evidence. And I have to look into this a bit more because I've never come across this before. I've in all of my years covering courts, I've never seen an approach this strict. I think there are some things that were going on behind the scenes about disclosure of evidence when those texts were handed over, that perhaps the judge meant that the judge was unable to verify them in time for the trial. I'm not sure about that. But it's very surprising. It's very, very surprising, and I think that those texts really could have led to a different outcome, as well as the medical records. And the second question about the jury not being sequestered, it baffles me, honestly, because sequestering a jury, as you say, is when you basically separate them from society for the duration of a trial. So you put them in a hotel, you make sure that they're not communicating with people outside of the jury. It does happen less and less, but this is the archetypal trial where you would expect the jury to be sequestered, and that's because, as we've seen on the outside, this turned into a complete circus in terms of the hashtag Justice for Johnny Depp gangs on the internet, and also part of Amber Heard's $100 million counterclaim was an accusation that Johnny Depp had led a paid, coordinated social media campaign against her, including these hashtags, Justice for Johnny Depp, hashtag Amber Heard is a psychopath, those kinds of things. That he paid bots and fake accounts to kind of spread this information. So that's a very serious allegation. If you have an allegation that kind of nefarious activity is going on to try and sway the conversation online, it's much more important to sequester the jury. As well as that, so the jury is instructed not to look at social media or do any outside research. It still happens. Juries still do this. We know they still do this. I have no idea if this jury did, but it's possible. But even if they didn't, the thing that, I think this really epitomizes what went wrong here. So there were TikTok videos making fun of Amber Heard's sexual assault allegations against Johnny Depp. She alleged that he assaulted her with a vodka bottle. And there were all these videos online mocking that allegation. But even if the jury didn't, find those online, people turned up in real life in Virginia and acted them out for her while she walked into the courtroom, because they knew that, she probably wasn't looking online, but they really wanted to make sure that she saw it. And, it's possible that the jury saw that as well. So, I feel like this case, we have to let go of this idea that the way cases are being talked about on social media doesn't spill over into the actual justice system, because the fact that people took time out of their day to stand outside court and act out these vicious, nasty, mocking videos of her just shows that, this jury should 100% have been sequestered. And, it's hard to see this verdict as not contaminated by what was happening on social media for this entire trial.
Should also know, and I should apologise for the language here, but what Johnny Depp wrote in text messages about Amber Heard: "I will fuck her burnt corpse afterwards to make sure she's dead. Mushy, pointless, dangling, overused, floppy fish market." Just lurid misogyny, really grotesque misogyny in an objective sense. Obviously, I don't think anyone rational could listen to that and think it's anything other than extreme misogyny. I mean, in terms of the narrative, again, that's come out, and I just want to link this, I guess, the final part, just to Me Too, and I suppose the backlash against what I suppose was a period in which there was at least a consensus that, well, not a consensus, but a broader acceptance that women should be believed if they speak out about male violence that they have endured. And on the basis that from every level of society, women, often on a daily basis, have to suffer these experiences and get no redress, no accountability, nothing. And that there was finally a moment when that could change. And so in terms of this narrative now, at best people will say, well, actually, maybe they both abused each other. And they'll say, in terms of how Amber Heard behaved herself. So I'm just interested in that, because obviously, this idea that someone in this context, kind of has that perfection has to be obtained if they're to be believed or accepted. So just interested in that kind of the focus on a lot of Amber Heard's behavior and this idea, well, actually, maybe they both abused each other. That's obviously not what was reflected in the narrative, though. But how that then links to the backlash against the Me Too movement.
Absolutely. So this, I think, is another one of the central questions that we really will need to pay attention to over the coming months and years, because this is going to keep coming up, especially with this, incredibly high profile precedent. And I think the thing that happened here is that the public were really ready to kind of take delight in the idea that an accuser has been shown to be lying, and therefore that, Me Too has gone too far, and, all of those arguments. But again, it's really hard to square that with the evidence that was presented in this trial, because, just to name a few things, she had 11 witnesses who saw her with bruises. She had a makeup artist who testified that she covered up bruises. She had a witness who saw Johnny Depp hit her firsthand. This is the kind of evidence that most survivors of sexual assault and intimate partner violence do not have. She actually had much more documentary and firsthand evidence than most victims are able to have, and she still lost. So it tells us something about what this backlash will demand of victims who come forward publicly, and it's setting the bar much higher than I ever would have expected personally, in terms of how much evidence a victim has to have in order to prove that abuse happened. And secondly, as you say, there's a substitution going on. What this trial should have been about is, can she substantiate the allegations that she made in the Washington Post? Unless those 11 people lied through their teeth and were all part of a huge coordinated hoax, I think she did prove that at least one instance of abuse happened. But that question was substituted for the question of, does she deserve to be someone who is able to speak out about this kind of thing? And that's where, again, Johnny Depp's team, brought in all this evidence about her character and about other things that she's done, hoping that the jury would focus more on that question, this idea of, does she deserve to be held up as a victim? And that is a problem, because firstly, that's not a legal question. That shouldn't be a question in a court of law. And secondly, it goes to myths about domestic violence and sexual violence that I really thought we had overcome. And that is this idea that in order to have the right to be a victim, you have to be perfect in other ways, and you have to conduct yourself in ways that are beyond reproach. So, we saw all this evidence about things that she's done. I'm sure you've heard about this idea that she said that she would donate all of her divorce settlement to charity, and she hasn't done that yet. People really seized on that, right? And when you're looking at the law, that actually doesn't matter to whether or not she's a victim of abuse. And it was entered into evidence in order to try and get the jury to say, this is not a good enough person, so we're not going to give her the right to speak publicly about this. And that's what the backlash is. I think that's what we're going to see is people trying to attack the credibility of victims outside of the evidence of abuse, in order to tap into this idea in society that, victims have to be perfect, or victims have to be kind of likable, in order to be able to speak out. And that really worries me, because again, it's a myth about surviving abuse that I really thought that we'd kind of gotten past, and this trial shows that we absolutely haven't, and that so many people were just waiting to latch onto this argument that she's an imperfect victim.
Just finally, the ramifications of this in terms of what it means for women, because if we look just at Britain alone, it's estimated that 1.4 million women are victims, survivors of domestic abuse every year. And obviously, that's not going into sexual assault. I think it's about 400,000 sexual assaults against women a year, and around 85 to 90,000 women raped a year. Now, obviously, I mean, the argument's been made that if we were to talk about, and obviously I'm separating this from this trial, but just in terms of, whatever people think about the verdicts, the coverage of it and the conclusions being drawn from it, when it comes to women speaking out and being believed, where does this now leave that? Where does it leave it in a country where, I mean, people say rape is essentially decriminalized because the vast majority of men who commit rape, there's no justice at all, let alone sexual assaults or any form of sexual harassment. So where does this leave us? What's your concerns about, again, whatever anyone thinks about this particular trial, what the ramifications will be going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ramifications of this will be huge, and even at this point, hard to quantify. I think it's hard to underestimate the impact that this will have. I've, for example, already spoken to a number of women who, since the verdict came down last week, have received notifications that their abusers are suing them for defamation. I've spoken to caseworkers who have clients calling them up now on a daily basis saying they're now being sued for defamation and asked to prove again their abuse in court. So, this is going to have a trickle-down effect on survivors everywhere. And I think, what you said about putting this in the context of rape being decriminalized, certainly in this country, and the evidence shows, that this is happening in the US as well. And, I think what's important to remember is that the Me Too movement and speaking out about abuse was a response to the fact that the criminal justice system was completely failing to address it. So we have fewer and fewer prosecutions and convictions in terms of both domestic violence and sexual assault. So the Me Too movement was saying, okay, we can't change the justice system. Hopefully, eventually it will change. We as individuals, we can't change the fact that the justice system doesn't take these crimes seriously. So if we speak publicly about it, that is one way to kind of achieve some sort of justice for ourselves. What this kind of movement of strategically using defamation lawsuits to silence victims who choose to do that based on the fact that they don't have mountains of evidence to prove it, even though, as I said, I believe Amber Heard did, that shows that not only will the criminal justice system not kind of acknowledge these crimes, but this is a way for the legal system to be used to shut down, the other form of justice that the Me Too movement wanted, which was being able to speak freely about the things that have happened to us. So, Marilyn Manson, for example, has filed a huge defamation suit against Evan Rachel Wood. And we have people online who have been using the Justice for Johnny Depp hashtag who've now moved over into the Justice for Marilyn Manson camp. So there's a group of people who've been mobilized into this movement that is about, trying to shut down people who are speaking publicly about abuse. And those people are now, moving on to backing Marilyn Manson. And that should be really concerning to us, because we had this kind of one section of society where women could speak about abuse, and we're now seeing that even that is no longer being tolerated, and that the legal system is being used to shut that down as well. And the more and more defamation suits we see like this, the more concerning it will be. And I think this has been coming for a long time, this kind of backlash against people being able to tell their stories, especially when you think about the fact that, as you said at the beginning, Johnny Depp was not named in this article. There were no specific allegations in this article. It was very broad. It was it was worded in a way that was intended to avoid exactly this outcome. And yet, this is what's happened. So it will have a chilling effect on people being able to speak publicly about abuse, and it already is. And I think that really concerns me.
Lucia, that was absolutely brilliant, so detailed and thorough, and really just went into the weeds. I think it's so important to talk about the potential consequences and what this means. And I think it's very important as well to have an alternative to the narrative that obviously now has become pretty dominant in the aftermath. But honestly, it's a grim thing to have to talk about, but you did it so wonderfully. So we're so lucky to have you all over again. And do follow, of course, Lucia Osborne-Crowley on. Yeah, let me just make sure I get your Twitter handle right. What is your Twitter handle again? I've got it here somewhere.
So it's LUCIAOC with an underscore at the end, which is because I have an embarrassing teenage Twitter without the underscore that I can't figure out how to delete. So
do you know, it's I
a little underscore there.
Because I got Owen Jones 84 because there's a Florida IT guy who doesn't tweet who's got Owen Jones. But it was funny because at first when I was Owen Jones 84, everyone was like, "Oh my god, he's showing off how young he is." And it's like, I'm now 37. It's lost its. lost its advantage. Now every year it just becomes a kind of glaring reminder that actually I'm just getting older. So I didn't really think about that. Anyway, we all learn. We pay the mistakes of our hubris. But thank you so much as ever. Honestly, real honor, brilliant stuff, and look forward to speaking to you too. Take care. Great stuff. Very eclectic show, but brilliant to talk about two very different, very important issues, of course. Thank you to everybody who obviously watched, all those who are listening on the podcast. And do listen and download the podcast if you haven't already. Thanks to David Bowater, Tad Campwell, Woody Woodpecker, and Attils Desix for your support on Super Chat. Do hit like before you go. Stop now. Press like. It takes you a second on YouTube. And do subscribe to the videos as well. And support us on patreon.com/OwenJones84. We've got lots of stuff coming up, and that's all down to you. So thanks for allowing this to continue on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, podcast, and Twitter. So yeah, I will see you all next week. Hopefully it won't be... I mean, given I've only had about 4 hours sleep, I think I more or less got through this unscathed. But the 2 guests carried it, let's be honest. Great. Lots of love, everyone. Enjoy whatever you're doing today. I will see you soon.